All right, so today is the second part in a five-part series, even though there's a list of six things that we need to keep in mind that we need to do. Last week we talked about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and today we're going to talk about increasing economic growth. We're not going to talk about it much because we've got some other videos on that our viewers can find. And then we're also, the main subject today is going to be a constitutional cap on spending growth. And then in subsequent weeks, we're going to talk about raising taxes. Sadly, that may have to happen. We better know which ones have do the least damage to the economy and have the greatest impact on revenue. We're going to have to figure out how to rein in the scope of the federal government, do less, rediscover the 10th Amendment. And then last but not least, we have $60 trillion approximately in mineral rights assets. And we better not sell those until we cap spending growth. But once we do, we better sell them at the right rate to generate the most money possible. And so let's hit that cap on spending growth. How's our group doing that says they have the number of states in order to have the Congress call the convention, but Congress won't call the convention? Now, how is that going? I know, Barry, you've been more involved in that than I have.
Well, let me begin with this fundamental flaw in fiscal policies at the federal level. And as you know, it's the fatal flaw is time inconsistency. How do we bind one Congress to follow the rules and policies of a previous Congress? And of course, we have some statutory rules in place that are supposed to balance the budget, limit debt, and impose fiscal responsibility. And now we have an administration that is serious about cutting government spending and downsizing government. But the problem is, how do we bind the next Congress? Let's say there is some success here and we get a reduction in government spending, perhaps even some stability in debt. What's to prevent the next Congress from simply reverting back to fiscal profligacy? And of course, what we know is that the statutory fiscal rules in place have been ineffective. Back in the great moderation of the 1980s and 1990s, we introduced statutory rules to balance the budget and limit debt. And I think in those years there was some success. I think that was a period where statutory fiscal rules had an impact in imposing fiscal discipline. But essentially, we've abandoned that. Over the last 2 decades, we've simply ignored those rules or suspended them. We suspend the debt limit, the spending limits that are imposed are just essentially ignored or suspended. So the answer to the question is, we need formal fiscal rules embodied incorporated in the Constitution. Constitutional fiscal rules have proven to be the most effective way to constrain the growth of government. We've seen this in other countries. Europe has some effective fiscal rules at the federal level, the Swiss debt brake. Other countries have constrained the growth of spending with these constitutional fiscal rules. Unfortunately, in the US, we don't have any effective constitutional fiscal rules. We have no fiscal rules in that sense. So, of course, we've recognized this for many years, and for at least a half a century, the Congress has proposed things like a balanced budget amendment be incorporated in the Constitution, and it's never gone anywhere. They came actually close to proposing this as a constitutional amendment back in the 1990s, but since then they've essentially given up. So I think that the best prospect for constitutional fiscal rules is to have them enacted under Article 5. And Article 5 says basically the states as well as Congress can propose amendments to the Constitution. Now, the states have been proposing fiscal responsibility amendments for more than a century, clear back to the 19th century, and Congress has essentially failed to even count these resolutions let alone call a convention. I think that in 1979, the best estimate is that we did have the 32 states, 33 states required to propose the amendment at that time, but Congress didn't even have the records of those proposed resolutions coming from the states. So I'm working with an organization that is basically saying, all right, we need to sue Congress. We need to file a lawsuit that would require that Congress count the ballots, count the resolutions, and if we are correct, in 1979, we reached the two-thirds majority required for the states to propose an amendment. So we expect this lawsuit to be filed here very shortly, within the next couple months. If that fails, we can go back to the individual states and through the initiative and referendum process and begin to propose an amendment drafted by the states and not wait for Congress to act. So that's sort of where this movement is, and there are a number of private organizations that are now working towards this end, but that's I think our best bet for fiscal responsibility amendment to be incorporated in the Constitution.
Yeah, Barry, you make one very, very good point there. We need that for continuity between administrations, what you called time inconsistency issue. So yeah, we can't be having the Trump administration doing one thing and then the next administration saying never mind and just jacking the spending back up. We have a very, very serious problem for which we need to do each of the 6 things that we've stated. Let me state them again. Once was good enough. But we need to do all 6 of those because we have dug
John, something has happened to our video here.
We've dug ourselves a really serious hole, and we need a big shovel to get out of it. And one of the other reasons that we need the fiscal responsibility amendment, the process that you just described, is because we desperately need to reassure the bondholders. We've just gone through a period here where the Federal Reserve has been trying to lower interest rates, and they've lowered some interest rates, but the main interest rate on federal debt has continued to rise despite that, which is akin to an alarm bell ringing that says the bond buyers are starting to get skittish, and that means that we might have to print a bunch of money to keep from defaulting. And anyway, so that's a horrible process. That's not just falling over the fiscal cliff, that's hurtling over it. And so, yeah, we need the fiscal responsibility amendment through Article 5 to provide.
I call that the canary in the mine shaft, and that is when the interest rate on public debt exceeds the rate of economic growth, essentially you have an unstable fiscal policy that will essentially blow up. That is, you're going to go over what we call a fiscal cliff, and you're going to see interest rates increasing not just to 4 or 5% as we're seeing at this point, but interest rates can accelerate at a very rapid rate if citizens lose confidence in the ability of the government to pursue a responsible fiscal policy.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that additional point. Not only are interest rates on the federal debt rising because the bond buyers are starting to get skittish, but now that interest rate is above the rate of economic growth, which further puts us in a spiral of still unknown speed. Hopefully we can still arrest the fall from that, but we're not going to get it done without additional revenue. And one of those additional revenue sources that we'll discuss in future weeks is sale of mineral rights to exploit mineral assets that the federal government owns the right to. And it doesn't make any sense at all to sell those off until we've capped spending growth. Otherwise, the next administration, maybe even the current one, will use all of the additional money to produce additional spending. That's what they were doing in the last administration. Any additional revenue to them justified the spending on an additional program.
Yeah, and I think that the interest rate issue is key here. Back in the 1990s, the U.S. had one of the lowest interest rates on public debt of among the developed countries. And that reflects the fact that in those years, we call it the Great Moderation, but in fact, the government did balance the budget and it did stabilize debt. And so we know how to do this. And interest rate on U.S. debt should not be one of the highest, well, tied for the highest with Great Britain, where we are now. And if we can get this responsible fiscal policy back in place, as we're proposing, we'll see the interest rates in the U.S. drop and conceivably drop to among the lowest in the developed countries. And as you say, the bond markets have picked up on this, and we're seeing downgrades of the U.S. government bond securities. Lots of indications that this canary in the mine shaft of higher interest rates and higher costs of servicing the debt, that's the clue that we're on an unsustainable path. So, as you say, maybe in our next sessions, we'll be talking about ways that we begin to handle on spending and revenue and reforms, perhaps mineral sales, and how we can then begin to move on a sustainable fiscal path.
Indeed.
By the way, John, I think there was an interruption in our podcast here. You'll have to edit that out. There was something interrupting the feed there.
Yeah, one of us had a little glitch in the internet connection, maybe both of us. And we'll have to do a little more editing on this one than the others, where all we had to do was put a start and a stop in there. But yeah, that's all right. Obviously this part of our conversation is not going to be part of that YouTube video. As we speak, I believe that we are finally putting our podcasts on the YouTube video in the IOPA YouTube channel, and so we have somebody editing them. And so as soon as this gets recorded and converted, I will look at it and see where the edits need to be, and maybe they'll get it edited right away. By the way, we had a great February 26th, that was Wednesday of this week, Zoom call on the unconstitutionality of government speech, education as government speech. So a short route, hopefully, relatively short route, hopefully, to school choice in all 50 states, as opposed to just one state at a time. If you're interested in that subject, I'll be glad to connect. I'll send you a copy of that webinar. But that is also being converted into a YouTube video, hopefully today.
Well, that's great to hear. Well, now, do you have any problems with using some of these podcasts on some of the other platforms, other groups that I'm involved in, or do you want to limit it to IOPA?
No, once we get them edited to where all this stuff, like what our conversation right now, is taken out, broadcast, you scream it from the rooftop, use everywhere, hyperlink it to phrases in anything. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to see if some of the other groups would like to use some of these podcasts. And I know we're putting up on IOPA, and I'll also be sending them some of the materials that you and I have come up with over the years on these issues. So I guess I have your approval for sort of carte blanche use of this material other than IOPA. So I don't want to get into it. I don't want to get into any lawsuits or anything like that.
Well, anyway, yeah. We've got them. We have an IOPA YouTube channel, so they're going to be made public through that. And so anybody can copy the link to anything they want to. In addition, I don't have them up right this minute, but I plan to have the better videos, maybe all of them, as part of a conversation forum. So if people want to watch them and then react to them and then be reacted to, that's the plan.
Well, that's great. And we may get some traction using this material in other venues as well. So let's hang in there. I think it's worth this effort, and I appreciate your doing all the administrative stuff to make it happen.
Let me double check our schedule and see when we'll be talking again. Yeah, not till March 17th, but anyway, So,
March 17th.
yeah, that's a
I'm gonna write
Monday.
that down.
Yeah.
I forgot. I know I have your correspondence on that. Let me just take a minute.
Yeah,
March 17th.
that's a Monday.
Okay.
And then after that,
Monday, March 17th.
yeah, after that, we'll go back to our Friday afternoons.
Okay. And then after that, Friday afternoon, every other week, I guess.
Right, let me see yeah, then March 17th and the 28th and then April 11th for this particular series.
Okay. And I appreciate your sending me the sort of memo that tells me what we're talking about in each of these. And I can use that to sort of prepare for them. And so I think we're making some progress here, and look forward to what we come up with.
It'll be fun on both the school choice and the fiscal front. Those are the IOPA biggies, and as you say, we're starting to make some traction on that. We have for the thing that we did a couple of days ago, we have the scholar in terms of that lawsuit and the equal protection and education as speech stuff. The legal scholar, he was the star of that webinar. So
Well, that's great.
and we have you, the leading fiscal person, the star, IOPA star for that part of our mission.
Okay, well, we'll keep fighting a good fight for sure.
Yeah. And I'm your disciple and glad to be. All right.
Okay,
See you soon.